This is my true story. My son locked me in the church bathroom during my wife's funeral so I could not attend it. He told everyone I was too heartbroken to be there while I pounded on the door screaming to be let out. I listened to my wife's entire funeral through the ceiling, trapped in that tiny room while he played the role of devoted son upstairs. After the funeral, he moved into my house uninvited and started acting like he owned it. But 1 week later, a sheriff knocked on the door with an eviction notice that destroyed his life. Before I tell you what happened, tell us where you are watching from, and please subscribe so more people hear my story. I built everything alongside my wife for 50 years, and we went through every kind of hardship and joy that life could throw at a couple. We got married when we were both 22 years old, with almost nothing to our names. We lived in a tiny apartment and worked multiple jobs and saved every penny we could. We had 3 children over the years and raised them in a modest house we bought with money we scraped together. We taught them the value of hard work and honesty and treating people with respect and dignity. My wife and I survived financial storms that nearly destroyed us multiple times. There were years when I lost my job and we had to live on her income alone. There were times when medical bills piled up and we did not know how we would pay them. There were moments when we argued and disagreed and wondered if we would make it through. But we always held hands and faced everything together. We made decisions as partners, and we supported each other through every crisis and every triumph. We grew old together, watching our children become adults and start their own families. We became grandparents and celebrated anniversaries and watched our hair turn gray. We took care of each other through sickness and injury and the slow decline that comes with aging. When my wife got sick with cancer 2 years before she died, I was by her side every single day. I drove her to every treatment and held her hand through every procedure and stayed awake with her on nights when the pain was too much to sleep. The cancer was brutal and relentless, and it took everything from her slowly. She lost her hair and her strength and her ability to do the things she loved. But she never lost her spirit or her love for our family. She fought as hard as she could for as long as she could because she wanted more time with me and with our children and grandchildren. I watched her suffer for 2 years and it broke my heart every single day, but I never left her side because that is what you do when you love someone. When she finally died, I was shattered in ways I cannot put into words. She had been my partner and my best friend and the center of my world for 50 years. Losing her felt like losing half of myself. I could barely function in the days after her death. I could not eat or sleep or think clearly. Everything reminded me of her, and everywhere I looked I saw her absence. The house felt empty and cold without her presence. My son called me the day after she died and offered to handle all the funeral arrangements. He said I was too grief-stricken to deal with the details and that he wanted to take that burden off my shoulders. I was grateful because I truly did not have the energy to plan a funeral and make decisions about caskets and services and flowers. I thought his sudden attentiveness was a sign that he cared about me and wanted to help me through the worst time of my life. I believed he was finally showing the love and compassion I had always hoped he would develop. Looking back now, I realize his offer had nothing to do with love or compassion. It was calculation. He wanted control of the funeral so he could control the narrative and position himself as the devoted son who stepped up when his father fell apart. He wanted to be seen as the strong, capable one, while I was painted as the weak, broken old man who could not handle his grief. But I did not see any of this at the time because I was too lost in my own pain to recognize his manipulation. I let him take over all the planning, and I trusted him to create a service that would honor his mother and give our family a chance to say goodbye. I thought he would include me in the decisions and respect my role as her husband of 50 years. I thought he understood that I needed to be there to speak about her and share memories and receive condolences from the people who loved her. I never imagined he would lock me away and steal my chance to say goodbye to the woman I loved more than anything in this world. The funeral was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon at the church where my wife and I had been married 50 years earlier. I arrived at the church an hour early, wearing the suit she had always said made me look handsome. I wanted everything to be perfect because this was the last thing I could do for her. I walked through the church looking at the flowers and the photographs my son had arranged, and I felt grateful that he had put together such a beautiful service. People started arriving and offering me condolences, and I shook hands and accepted hugs and tried to hold myself together. About an hour before the service was supposed to start, I needed to use the bathroom. I asked someone where the restroom was, and they directed me to a small bathroom in the church basement, down a narrow hallway. I walked down the stairs and found the bathroom and went inside. It was tiny, with barely enough room to turn around. I used the facilities and washed my hands and was about to leave when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. I opened the door to step out, and suddenly my son was standing there blocking my path. Before I could ask what he was doing, he pushed me back into the bathroom with force. I stumbled backward and nearly fell. He stepped into the doorway and looked at me with cold eyes that I barely recognized. He said, "Stay in there, old man, and do not make a sound." I asked him what he was talking about and why he was doing this. He said, "You will embarrass us looking pathetic up there, crying and falling apart in front of everyone." I told him I had every right to be at my own wife's funeral and that I needed to say goodbye to her. He said I had already said goodbye and that the funeral was not about me, it was about showing respect to her memory. He said I was too unstable and grief-stricken to be up there and that he would handle everything. I tried to push past him, but he shoved me back again harder this time. Then he stepped out of the bathroom and slammed the door shut. I heard the lock click from the outside. I grabbed the door handle and tried to open it, but it would not move. I realized he had locked me in from the outside using some kind of latch or bolt. I started pounding on the door and yelling for him to let me out. I screamed that he could not do this and that I needed to be at the funeral. I heard his footsteps walking away down the hallway and up the stairs. I kept pounding and screaming, but nobody came. The bathroom was in the basement, far from where people were gathering upstairs, and the walls were thick. I could hear the organ music starting to play above me, which meant the service was beginning. I pounded harder and screamed louder, but the music drowned out my voice. I kicked at the door and threw my body against it, but it was solid wood and would not budge. I looked for another way out, but there were no windows and no other exits. I was trapped in that tiny bathroom while my wife's funeral was happening directly above my head without me. I kept trying for several more minutes until my hands were bruised and my voice was hoarse. Then I realized nobody was coming and nobody could hear me. My son had deliberately locked me away and left me here. He had planned this. He wanted me out of the way so he could run the funeral without me there to interfere or show weakness or take attention away from him. I sank down onto the floor with my back against the wall, and I felt a rage and a heartbreak so intense I thought I might die right there. I could hear voices and footsteps above me as people gathered in the sanctuary. I could hear the muffled sound of someone speaking, which must have been the pastor starting the service. I was sitting on cold tile in a locked bathroom, listening to my wife's funeral begin without me. My son had stolen my chance to say goodbye to her in front of our family and friends. He had humiliated me and betrayed me in the worst possible way at the worst possible time. I spent 2 hours in that tiny bathroom listening to my wife's funeral happen without me through the ceiling above my head. I could hear the organ playing hymns we had chosen together when we planned our funerals years ago. I could hear voices singing, and I recognized some of the songs as her favorites. I could hear people speaking, and I knew they were giving eulogies and sharing memories of her. I could hear crying, and I knew our family and friends were mourning together while I sat alone in a locked room below them. I pressed my ear against the ceiling and tried to make out the words being spoken, but everything was muffled and unclear. I could only catch fragments and pieces. I heard my daughter's voice at one point, and I knew she was speaking about her mother. I heard my other son talking and sharing a story that made people laugh. I heard what sounded like my grandchildren reading something. Every voice I heard reminded me that I should have been up there with them, sharing my own memories and saying my own goodbye. The worst part was hearing my son speak. His voice came through clearly because he must have been standing close to a microphone. I could not make out all his words, but I heard enough to know he was talking about how much his mother meant to him and how hard it was to lose her. I heard him talk about being strong for the family during this difficult time. I heard people responding with sounds of sympathy and support. He was playing the role of the devoted, grieving son while I sat locked in a bathroom that he had trapped me in. I cried, sitting on that cold tile floor with my head in my hands. I cried for my wife, and for the goodbye I was being denied. I cried for the 50 years we had spent together, and for the future we would never have. I cried because my own son had done this to me, and because I could not understand how he had become so cruel. I cried until I had no tears left, and then I just sat there numb and broken, listening to the service continue above me. I heard the final hymn being sung, and I knew the service was ending. I heard movement and voices as people started to leave the sanctuary. I heard cars starting in the parking lot outside. I started pounding on the door again, hoping someone would hear me now that the music had stopped. I yelled for help until my throat was raw, but nobody came. The church must have been emptying out, and everyone was leaving to go to the cemetery for the burial. I was going to miss that too. After what felt like forever, I heard footsteps on the stairs coming down to the basement. I started pounding and yelling again, hoping it was someone who could let me out. The footsteps got closer and stopped outside the bathroom door. I heard fumbling with the lock, and then the door swung open. A janitor stood there looking shocked and confused. He asked what I was doing in there and how I got locked in. I pushed past him and ran up the stairs as fast as my old legs could carry me. The sanctuary was completely empty. The flowers were still there and the photographs were still displayed, but all the people were gone. I ran outside to the parking lot and saw it was almost empty except for a few cars. I did not see my son's car anywhere. He had left. He had locked me in that bathroom and conducted the entire funeral without me, and then he had left without even staying to unlock the door or face what he had done. He had abandoned me there and driven away. I stood in the parking lot feeling utterly destroyed. I had missed my wife's funeral. I had not been there to say goodbye, or to speak about her, or to stand with my family as we mourned her. My son had stolen that from me deliberately and cruelly. He had humiliated me and left me trapped while he played the role of the strong, devoted son. And now he was gone, and I was standing alone outside an empty church, having missed the most important goodbye of my life. I called my daughter from the church parking lot and asked her where everyone had gone. She said they were at the cemetery for the burial and asked where I had been. She said she had looked for me during the service and could not find me anywhere. I told her what my son had done, and there was silence on the other end of the phone for several long seconds. Then she said, "Oh my God, Dad, I am so sorry." And her voice was filled with shock and anger. She said my son had told everyone I was too unstable and grief-stricken to attend the funeral, and that I had asked to stay home and mourn privately. I felt my blood turn cold hearing this. My son had not only locked me away, but he had lied to everyone about why I was not there. He had told our entire family and all our friends that I was too weak and too broken to handle being at the funeral. He had painted himself as the understanding son who was respecting his father's wishes while managing everything during a difficult time. Everyone had believed him, because why would they question it? I had lost my wife, and it made sense that I might be too devastated to attend. My daughter said she had thought it was strange that I would miss the funeral, but my son had been so convincing. He told her and her brother that I had broken down that morning and begged him to let me stay home because I could not face seeing the casket and hearing people talk about their mother. He said I was in a fragile mental state and that forcing me to attend would be cruel. He said he was doing what was best for me by handling everything and letting me grieve in peace. She said my son had positioned himself as the strong, capable one who was holding the family together. He greeted everyone at the church and thanked them for coming. He organized the pallbearers and coordinated with the funeral home. He gave a moving eulogy about his mother and how much she meant to him. He accepted condolences and hugged people and presented himself as the devoted son who was stepping up during tragedy. Everyone praised him for being so strong and so mature and so caring toward his grieving father. My daughter said she started to suspect something was wrong when the service ended, and my son seemed eager to leave quickly. She asked if we should go check on me before going to the cemetery, and he said no, he would check on me later and that I needed space and time alone. She said his answer felt off, but she did not push it because she was grieving too and not thinking clearly. Now that she knew what he had really done, she was furious and disgusted. She told me the real reason he locked me away was because he wanted sole control of the narrative and the attention. He could not risk me being there to receive condolences or to show strength that would diminish his performance as the devoted son. If I had been there, people would have focused on me as the grieving husband of 50 years. They would have listened to me speak about my wife, and they would have comforted me and supported me. My son would have been just one of the children in the background instead of the central figure managing everything. He wanted the sympathy and the praise and the attention that came with being the strong one during a crisis. He wanted people to see him as mature and capable and caring. He wanted to be the hero of the story, and the only way to make that happen was to remove me from the picture entirely. So he locked me in a bathroom and told everyone I was too weak to attend, and then he took center stage at my wife's funeral while I sat trapped below listening through the ceiling. My daughter said our other son was equally horrified when she told him what happened. They both said they wanted to confront him immediately and demand an explanation. But I told them to wait because I needed time to think about how to handle this. I said I wanted to make sure he paid for what he did in a way that would hurt him as much as he had hurt me. I was not interested in apologies or explanations. I wanted justice. After the funeral, my son showed up at my house uninvited with suitcases and bags like he was moving in. I was sitting in the living room, still in shock from everything that had happened, when he walked through the front door without knocking. He said he had decided to move in temporarily to take care of me during this difficult time. He said I was clearly not capable of living alone in my grief-stricken state, and that he felt it was his responsibility as my son to make sure I was okay. His words sounded caring, but his tone was cold and calculated. I told him I did not need him to take care of me and that I wanted to be alone. He ignored me completely and started carrying his things upstairs to the guest bedroom. He said we could discuss it later, but for now he was staying, and that was final. I was too exhausted and too broken to argue with him. I had just missed my wife's funeral because he locked me in a bathroom, and I did not have the energy to fight him about moving into my house. I thought maybe he would stay for a few days and then leave once he realized I was managing okay on my own. But he did not leave after a few days. He settled in and started treating my house like it was his own property. He rearranged furniture without asking me, saying the layout was inefficient and outdated. He went through my wife's belongings and started throwing things away, claiming he was helping me declutter and move forward. I found him putting her clothes in garbage bags one afternoon, and I told him to stop. He said I was being irrational and that keeping her things was unhealthy and preventing me from healing. I told him those were my decisions to make, not his. He rolled his eyes and said I was proving his point about not being capable of managing on my own. He started inviting his friends over for loud parties on weekends. I would be upstairs trying to sleep or trying to grieve in peace, and I would hear music blasting and people laughing and drinking. I came downstairs one night and asked him to keep it down, and he laughed and said I needed to lighten up and stop being such a miserable old man. His friends looked at me with pity, like I was some pathetic burden he had to deal with. I went back upstairs feeling humiliated in my own home. He made decisions about the house without consulting me. He hired people to repaint rooms, saying the colors were depressing. He replaced appliances, claiming they were too old and needed upgrading. He acted like he was doing me favors, but really he was erasing my wife's presence and making the house feel like his instead of ours. Every change he made felt like another violation and another theft of the life I had built with her. When I protested or tried to assert any authority, he would sneer at me and say I was too old to manage the house anyway. He said he was doing me a favor by taking over because I clearly could not handle basic decisions or responsibilities. He said I should be grateful he was willing to sacrifice his time and energy to take care of me. He made me feel small and helpless and incompetent in the home I had lived in for 30 years. I realized he had moved in because he assumed the house would be his soon enough when I died. He was treating it like his property because he believed he had already inherited it. He thought my grief and my age made me weak and confused and unable to stop him from doing whatever he wanted. He thought he could push me around and take control of my life and my assets, and I would be too broken to fight back. What he did not know was that the house was still legally mine with the deed in my name and proper documentation with my lawyer. He did not know that my wife and I had discussed removing him from our will months before she died after he had shown his true colors in various ways. He did not know that we had kept those plans quiet and had not told any of our children what we had decided. He thought grief made me weak and confusion made me blind, but he was wrong about both. The house and every asset I owned were still legally mine with meticulous documentation that my lawyer had prepared years ago. My wife and I had worked hard to build our financial security, and we had been careful about estate planning and making sure everything was properly organized. We had met with our lawyer regularly to update our will and make sure our wishes were clear and legally binding. We owned our home outright with no mortgage, and we had savings accounts and retirement funds and life insurance policies that we had carefully managed over the decades. My son had always assumed he would inherit a significant portion of everything when we died. He was the oldest child, and he seemed to believe that entitled him to more than his siblings. Over the years, he had made comments about what he would do with the house when it became his. He talked about selling it and using the money to buy something bigger and newer. He talked about our savings like they were already his, and he just had to wait for us to die before he could access them. His attitude had always bothered me, but I had tried to ignore it and hope he would mature and develop better values. But about 6 months before my wife died, his true nature became impossible to ignore anymore. He had started asking intrusive questions about our finances and our assets. He wanted to know exactly how much we had saved and what our house was worth, and whether we had updated our will recently. When I told him those were private matters, he became angry and said he had a right to know what he would be inheriting. I told him that was not how it worked, and that our estate was our business, not his. He accused me of hiding something and suggested I might be wasting money or making bad decisions that would diminish his inheritance. My wife and I had a long conversation after that incident about whether we wanted to leave anything to him at all. We talked about his sense of entitlement and his lack of respect for us as human beings, rather than just sources of money. We talked about how he seemed more interested in our deaths than our lives. We decided that we would remove him from our will entirely and split everything between our other 2 children and various charities. We met with our lawyer and made the changes official with proper legal documentation. We had planned to tell him about the change at some point, but we kept putting it off because we knew it would cause a huge confrontation. My wife got sick before we had the chance, and then all our energy went into her treatment and care. We decided to wait until after she recovered, or after she passed, to deal with informing him. She died before we ever told him, and now he had no idea that he had been written out of our will months earlier. He assumed everything would go to him and his siblings in equal portions, or maybe even with him getting more as the oldest. He had no idea that my wife and I had decided he deserved nothing because of his cruelty and his greed. When he moved into my house after her funeral, he was positioning himself to take control of assets he thought he would inherit. He was treating me like an obstacle that would soon be removed by death. He thought he just had to wait me out and pretend to care for me until I died, and then everything would be his. He thought my grief made me weak and unable to see what he was doing. He thought my age made me confused and easy to manipulate. He thought he could lock me in a bathroom during my wife's funeral and get away with it because I was too broken to fight back. He thought he could move into my house and take over my life, and I would just accept it because I had no other options. He had no idea that I was still sharp enough to see through his manipulation and strong enough to do something about it. My lawyer knew everything that had happened at the funeral because I called him the day after and told him the whole story. He was horrified and angry on my behalf. He told me I had every legal right to evict my son from my property and that I should do it immediately. He said we should also make sure my son understood he was getting nothing from the estate, so he would stop treating me like a meal ticket. 1 week after my son locked me in that bathroom during my wife's funeral, I was sitting in the living room when there was a loud knock on the front door. My son was upstairs in what he now considered his bedroom, and he came running down to see who was there. I stayed seated and watched as he opened the door to find a sheriff's deputy standing there in full uniform holding official-looking papers. The deputy asked if he was my son and confirmed his full name. My son said yes, looking confused, and asked what this was about. The deputy handed him the papers and said he was being served with an eviction notice. My son stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. He said there must be some mistake because this was his father's house and he lived here. The deputy said according to the legal documents the house belonged to me and I had filed for his immediate eviction. My son's face went from confusion to anger as he started reading through the papers and seeing the official court seals and legal letterhead. He turned to look at me, still sitting calmly in my chair, and his face was red with rage. He screamed, "What the hell is this?" and demanded to know what I thought I was doing. I said quietly that I was exercising my legal right to remove an unwanted guest from my property. He said I could not do this and that he was family and that he was only there to help me. I said family does not lock their father in a bathroom during their mother's funeral. His face went pale as he realized I knew exactly what he had done and why. The deputy explained that he had 72 hours from that moment to remove all his belongings and vacate the property. After the 72 hours expired, the locks would be changed and anything left behind would be considered abandoned property. My son tried to argue with the deputy and claim that he had rights because he had been living there. The deputy said he was there as a guest, not a tenant, and therefore had no legal protections against eviction. He said if my son was not out within 72 hours, he would be arrested for trespassing. My son looked at the papers again and then looked at me with an expression of disbelief. He said, "You cannot do this. I am your son." I replied calmly that he was a guest who had overstayed his welcome. I said this was my house that I had paid for with my own money over decades of hard work. I said he had moved in uninvited and taken over and treated me like I was already dead. I said he had no right to be here, and I wanted him gone immediately. He started yelling that I was making a huge mistake and that I would regret this. He said I was too old and too grief-stricken to be making major decisions like this. He said I was clearly not thinking straight and that someone must have manipulated me into doing this. The deputy interrupted and said whether or not I was thinking straight was not his concern. He said the eviction paperwork was properly filed and legally valid and that my son needed to comply or face arrest. My son turned back to me and his anger shifted to desperation. He said, "Dad, please, you cannot do this. Where am I supposed to go?" I said that was not my problem and that he should have thought about that before locking me in a bathroom and stealing my chance to say goodbye to my wife. I said he had humiliated me and betrayed me in the worst possible way, and now he was facing the consequences. He said it was not that bad and that I was overreacting and being dramatic. I stood up from my chair and walked over to where he was standing. I looked him in the eyes and said, "You locked your father away during his wife's funeral so you could play the devoted son and soak up sympathy and attention. You told everyone I was too unstable to attend when really you just wanted me out of the way. You are not welcome in this house anymore. This is my property, and you are now officially a trespasser." My lawyer had been waiting outside in his car during the eviction notice delivery, and he walked in right after the deputy finished explaining everything to my son. My son looked at the lawyer and asked who he was and what he was doing here. My lawyer introduced himself and said he represented me in all legal matters, including estate planning and property rights. He said he was there to make sure the eviction process was handled correctly and to deliver some additional information my son needed to hear. My son looked between me and the lawyer with growing panic in his eyes. He asked what additional information and demanded to know what was going on. My lawyer opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of documents. He said there was more news beyond just the eviction and that my son should probably sit down. My son refused and said he would stand and demanded the lawyer just tell him whatever it was. My lawyer shrugged and said he had been warned. My lawyer explained calmly and professionally that my son had been removed entirely from mine and my wife's estate. He said the changes had been made months before my wife died and were legally binding and irrevocable. He said every dollar in our savings accounts and every property we owned and every asset we had accumulated over 50 years of marriage would be distributed to my other 2 children and to various charitable organizations. My son would receive nothing, not a single penny, not a single item, nothing. My son's face went white and he looked like he might faint. He said that was impossible and that there must be some mistake. He said he was the oldest child and that he had been counting on his inheritance. My lawyer said there was no mistake and that the documentation was clear and had been properly executed. He showed my son the will with mine and my wife's signatures, and the date showing it had been changed 6 months ago. He showed him the list of beneficiaries, and my son's name was nowhere on it. My son frantically called out to me asking if this was true. I nodded and said yes, it was completely true. He asked why and how I could do this to him. I said he knew exactly why. I said my wife and I had decided months ago that he did not deserve to inherit anything from us because of his cruelty and his greed and his complete lack of respect for us as human beings. I said locking me in a bathroom during her funeral had only confirmed that we made the right decision. He started begging and saying he was sorry and that he had made a mistake. He said he would do anything to make it right and asked me to reconsider. I said the decision was final and that nothing he could say would change it. My lawyer added that even if I wanted to change my mind now, it would be complicated because the estate had already been structured and the beneficiaries had been notified. He said my wife's portion of the estate had already been distributed according to her will, and my portion would be distributed according to mine when I died. My son asked how much money he was losing, and my lawyer said that was confidential information, but that it was substantial. He said the house alone was worth several $100,000, and the savings and investments and life insurance policies added up to a significant amount. My son's legs buckled, and he had to grab the back of a chair to steady himself. The reality of what he had lost was crushing him, and I watched it happen with cold satisfaction. He started crying and saying this was not fair, and that he deserved something after everything he had done for us. I laughed bitterly and asked what exactly he had done for us besides lock me in a bathroom and lie to our entire family. I said he had moved into my house uninvited and treated it like his own, and thrown away my wife's belongings and made me feel like a prisoner in my own home. I said he had shown nothing but contempt for me, and now he was getting exactly what he deserved, which was nothing. My son spent the next several hours frantically calling family members begging for help and money and somewhere to stay. I could hear him upstairs on his phone with his voice getting more desperate with each call. He called his sister first, and I heard him crying and explaining that I had gone crazy and kicked him out and cut him out of the will. She apparently told him she knew exactly what he had done at the funeral and that he deserved everything he was getting. He tried to argue with her, but she hung up on him. I heard him throw his phone across the room in frustration. He called his brother next and tried a different approach. He said our father was being manipulated by his lawyer and making terrible decisions in his grief. He said the family needed to band together and get me declared mentally incompetent so they could take control of my assets and reverse the will changes. His brother apparently told him he was disgusting and that if anyone deserved to be cut off, it was him. His brother said what he did at the funeral was unforgivable and cruel beyond belief. My son tried to defend himself, but his brother hung up too. He called cousins and aunts and uncles trying to find someone who would take his side or at least give him money to help him get back on his feet. But word had spread quickly through the family about what he had done. My daughter had told everyone about him locking me in the bathroom during the funeral and lying about why I was not there. Everyone was horrified and disgusted. Nobody wanted to help him. Several relatives told him he should be ashamed of himself and that they wanted nothing to do with him. He came downstairs and tried one more time to beg me to reconsider. He got down on his knees in front of my chair and said he was sorry and that he had made a terrible mistake. He said he would do anything to make it right and asked me to please give him another chance. He promised he would change and be a better son and take care of me properly. His words sounded hollow and rehearsed, and I could see he was not truly sorry. He was just desperate because he had lost money. I looked down at him kneeling there, and I remembered being trapped in that bathroom pounding on the door while my wife's funeral happened above me. I remembered listening to him give a eulogy about how much he loved his mother while he had locked her husband away. I remembered him telling everyone I was too unstable to attend when really he just wanted me out of the way. I remembered all of it, and I felt nothing but cold anger toward him. I told him his words meant nothing to me because his actions had already shown me who he really was. I said he had locked me away from saying goodbye to the woman I loved for 50 years so he could play the role of devoted son and soak up attention and sympathy. I said that kind of cruelty could not be forgiven or forgotten. I said the eviction stood and the will stood, and he had 72 hours to get out of my house and out of my life. He tried to threaten me next, saying he would contest the will and fight me in court. My lawyer, who was still there, calmly explained that contesting the will would cost tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees and that my son had almost no chance of winning. He said the will had been properly executed and there was clear documentation of sound mind and proper procedure. He said my son would waste whatever money he had left on a legal battle he could not win. My son realized he had no options left. His family had turned against him. His inheritance was gone. He had no money and no place to stay. Within 72 hours, he had packed his belongings and moved out. I watched him load his car and drive away, and I felt relief wash over me. I changed the locks that same day. I visit my wife's grave every week now, and I finally have peace when I am there. I bring fresh flowers, and I sit on the bench nearby, and I talk to her about everything that has happened. I tell her about how I evicted our son and cut him out of the will, and made sure he understood there were consequences for his cruelty. I tell her I think she would approve of what I did because we had discussed removing him from the will together before she died. I feel her presence when I am there, and I believe she knows I got justice for both of us. The grave is beautiful and well maintained, and I make sure it always looks perfect. I replaced the flowers our son had chosen with ones I know she would have preferred. I added a new headstone with a better inscription that actually captures who she was, instead of the generic one our son had selected. I spend time there in quiet reflection, remembering our 50 years together and honoring her memory the way she deserved to be honored at her funeral before our son stole that moment from me. My other 2 children visit the grave with me sometimes, and we share memories and talk about their mother. They understand why I did what I did to their brother, and they support my decision completely. They were horrified when they learned he had locked me in a bathroom during the funeral, and they said they wanted nothing to do with him anymore. We have grown closer since their mother died, and I am grateful to have them in my life. They check on me regularly and help me with things I need and treat me with respect and love. My son calls me sometimes from numbers I do not recognize because I blocked his original number. When I see an unknown number, I let it go to voicemail. His messages are always the same mix of begging and anger and desperation. He says he is sorry and he made a mistake and he needs help. He says he is sleeping in his car and has no money and no job. He says his wife left him when she found out he lost his inheritance. He says his friends abandoned him when they realized he had no money to spend on them anymore. I listen to the voicemails once just to hear how far he has fallen, and then I delete them. I feel no sympathy for him whatsoever. He made his choices, and now he has to live with the consequences. He locked me away from my wife's funeral so he could play the devoted son and control the narrative. He moved into my house uninvited and treated me like I was already dead. He threw away my wife's belongings and acted like he owned everything. He showed me nothing but cruelty and contempt when I was at my lowest point. Within a month of being evicted, he lost everything. His wife divorced him because she had married him expecting a comfortable future funded by inheritance money that no longer existed. His friends stopped calling when they realized he could not afford to go out or buy drinks or maintain the lifestyle they were used to. He lost his job because he was too distracted and desperate to perform well. He ended up sleeping in his car in parking lots and asking strangers for money. His entire life collapsed because he had built it on the assumption that he would inherit wealth he never earned. I sleep soundly every night knowing I did the right thing. My wife would approve of how I handled this situation. She always said actions have consequences and that people who treat others cruelly should not be rewarded. I honored her memory by making sure our son learned that lesson in the hardest way possible. He locked me in a bathroom during my wife's funeral so he could play the devoted son. A week later, I locked him out of my house and my will forever. Some doors, once closed, never open again, and the door between me and my son is sealed permanently. He chose cruelty and manipulation, and now he lives with nothing while I live in peace, knowing justice was served.